My name is Anna Pippus, and I'm a few things. I'm a mother, I'm a lawyer, I'm an animal rights activist. I became vegan, I became vegetarian when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I don't really remember why, but it was sort of acknowledging, I think, that I loved animals and it was probably the right thing to do, but I didn't really think about it too much, and it was sort of a personal choice. In 2008, I started trying to become vegan, but it was the same kind of thing. I knew that such a thing existed, and I acknowledged this is probably a good thing to do, but I didn't really know why, and it wasn't something that I was really committed to. In 2010, I read a story that really changed things for me. I read about just one story about a downer bull. This bull had been transported to the slaughterhouse, was unable to stand, that's what downer means, can't stand, and was prodded with an electric prod, so essentially electrocuted off the slaughter truck. It took many, many hours to get this bull to drag himself to the slaughter truck, to the end of the slaughter truck, and then he smashed to the ground below, and was basically just left inside the slaughterhouse overnight because by then the workers were done for the day. And this story left a huge impression on me. It really clicked then for me that animal agriculture is about profits first, which of course makes a lot of sense. I just hadn't really thought it through. And from there, I started learning about everything that was happening to animals, and it really changed things for me. And actually, I was really troubled by what I learned. I had trouble sleeping, and I was really disturbed to think that, hundreds of millions of animals were going through a lot of horror, a lot of suffering, a lot of emotional and physical suffering and pain, and I wanted to try to end it. And I, naively, in retrospect, thought that if, like me, people knew what was happening to animals, they too would feel really motivated to act. And there's a lot of problems in the world, but not a lot of them are really solvable by us. We can't end many of the problems in the world by a simple change, but animal agriculture is unique in that way. We don't have to support it. We can go vegan, we can boycott it, and we could end it tomorrow if we all just stopped supporting it. My activism has evolved a lot over the years. I'm doing very different sorts of activism now than I was then. And back then I was really just trying to awareness raise. I was talking to people about what was happening. I was screening earthlings. I was going to protests. I was sharing things on social media. I was writing articles and trying to get them published in places. And I was met with a lot of apathy, I think. I think a lot of vegans and animal rights activists who are trying to talk about this problem facing animals. And it's a really simple sort of idea. I mean, what's happening to animals is wrong. We should treat others kindly. So, go vegan. It's a really sort of simple, let's practice the golden rule sort of thing. So it's not complicated. But I was met with resistance, as many people are, that there's all these sort of excuses that justify for people. And I think a lot of them are very refutable. I have two worlds. One is my animal rights world, but then the other is my law world. And lawyers are very logical. They're logical thinkers. So they acknowledge that this is probably right. But a lot of my legal friends are sort of, they're the apathy brand. They get it, they get that it's bad, but they're sort of like, well, I'm not perfect. I do bad things sometimes. So that for me is where I really struggle to figure out, what can we do with people who acknowledge that this is the right thing, but aren't really ready to go there for whatever reason. And I think a lot of it has to do with social factors. So accessibility, convenience, price, all of those economic decisions that go into what we eat. And if being vegan means taking an extra step or an extra moment at lunchtime or at dinner time or changing habits, it makes an extra complication. People are busy, people don't want to do it. I think that is what creates a real barrier for people. So in a lot of cases, those defensive, ridiculous arguments are a way of people's brains of really saying, it's too hard, I don't know how, I'm scared of it, I don't want to be different, I don't want to be weird, I don't want an extra thing to worry about. So they come up with these justifications. So I'm not a traditional lawyer in the sense that I don't take clients, not really, and I don't go to court. But what I do is I use my legal training to try to change legal systems. And that might mean helping activists defend themselves or help activists practice activism. It often means using legal skills to sort of strategically shift legal norms, because we're going to win some consumers over to practicing a consumer boycott, which is veganism, but we're not going to win over everybody. And for that, we need legal changes, we need political changes. And so I use my training to try to shift those legal practices. So there's many ways of doing that in the political and legal realm. It's essentially comes down to pushing for new laws and pushing for laws that we do have to be enforced, because we have laws that should be protecting animals. And the way that animals are being treated is actually already very inconsistent with the laws that we have. And they're inconsistent with social values as well. When most of us learn about what's happening to animals, we don't say, seems okay to me. We say, that's horrible, that's horrifying. So it doesn't really make sense that they're allowed to happen anyway. It's actually very undemocratic that our laws purport to protect animals, that people don't like what's happening to animals by and large, but that it's happening anyway. And those reasons sort of come down to money, right? Profit. These are industries with a lot of money for lobbying and for marketing. And then it comes down to, on the other side of it, sort of an inertia and a lack of prosecutorial will. On the other hand, people care about what's happening to animals, but they're not out there at their politicians' offices lobbying for changes and stuff like that. So I'm trying to help get those pieces into place and nudge them along so that we can start to see some better laws and better law enforcement. All right, so there's a lot of things people can do to try to change things legally and politically. One really important thing for people to do is to get in touch with their politicians at all levels of government, federal, provincial, and municipal. And you could approach it a few different ways. You could talk about animal rights generally, say that you're really concerned about what's happening to animals. You could educate them, let them know what's going on, and say that you really want to see things change, that animal rights is an issue you care about, that it's a voting issue for you, that you vote on it, and that you tell other people about what's happening and tell them to vote on it too. So that's one thing, one way to talk to politicians. The other way is to lobby for a specific change. So there are certain kinds of laws coming up at all levels of government now, the different things, a ban on cat and dog fur, a ban on cetaceans in captivity. These are the kinds of laws that somebody could be pushing for, again, at any level of government. Rodeo bans are another thing that are great to happen at the municipal level, and that can be very effective at setting a good precedent, at pushing for change, and at changing social norms, which can in turn create more momentum. So that's politicians. And then as for the law enforcement component of it, we have a lot of laws that should be protecting animals, and they aren't. And a big part of this is that what's happening to animals is largely invisible. So pigs and chickens, they're being farmed in windowless buildings on private property. Nobody is seeing what's happening with them. It's not a regulated industry, so law enforcement isn't there enforcing any kind of animal protection standards. But there are points at which we can see these animals, and one of them is when they're in transport. That happens on public property, of course, on highways and roads, and also at slaughterhouses. So often activists, and there are a lot of fantastic activists who make great use of this, they go outside of slaughterhouses and they document what's happening to animals. And we know from their efforts that animals are routinely suffering in transport in ways that are not consistent with animal transport laws. They routinely witness violations of laws, and these laws really are not being enforced very often. You can go online to government websites and see when there are prosecutions or fines issued, and it's not very frequently, not as frequently as the daily types of violations that we're seeing. So what people can do is report incidences of animal cruelty to law enforcement. It's a really effective way of changing the standards, to say, I'm a witness to animal cruelty, here's the license plate number, here's what I saw, I have video footage of it, I have photographic evidence of it, and I'd like to see a prosecution. It may not lead to charges, but that's okay, because even just reporting it is a form of political activism. If law enforcement doesn't act, and if you've been regularly reporting violations, you are able to say with credibility that our law enforcement system is broken, it doesn't work, we need to see changes. And that's a really effective argument, much more effective than I didn't bother to report it because I knew I would get no action. So it gives you credibility with sort of more of a mainstream voice. So that's really important, to be documenting these evidences of abuse, and to also hopefully changing the culture, to changing the standard, to making it so that each individual matters. Every time there's an animal who suffers in transport, it's not just chalked up as, well, a certain percentage are going to suffer because that's just the numbers game. We shouldn't accept that. It's not okay. It can't be a cost of doing business. So I went to law school because I've always been concerned with vulnerable individuals. Before law school, I worked in social work. I worked with women survivors of violence. But a lot of what I was seeing as a social worker was the result of broken systems. I was seeing that there was a lot of suffering and violence and poverty But it was sort of cleaning up these messes that I could see very easily were systemic in nature, that these were the results of policies and bad use of public funds, bad laws that were resulting in all of this pain and suffering. And so I went to law school because I realized that the law can be a really effective way of getting social change. It's striking at the roots of a lot of social problems. So I did go to law school because of my empathy and my concern for the suffering of vulnerable individuals. I wasn't sure how I would practice in law school. I also worked with refugees, which is another area that I think can be really important and heartbreaking. But the reality is that animal rights is where I felt I needed to be, because there's a lot of people doing fantastic work in a lot of these human rights areas, so much so that these jobs are actually highly competitive. It's an issue that all of us sort of recognize as being important. There's not a lot of work to do there socially. But with animals, that's not the case. Some people still need to be convinced that animals even matter, that their suffering even matters morally. To me, this is really self-evident. If a being is able to suffer, their suffering matters. But not everybody even believes that. So there's a lot more work to do. And the nature of suffering that's happening to animals, it's very extreme. It's literally a matter of life and death. And animals are suffering in really extreme ways that are being overlooked and in huge quantities. We're talking about hundreds of millions of animals every year that are going through our farming system. So for me, working with animals just was a natural fit. It's an emergency situation. It's happening right here all around us, and it needs a lot more advocates. Having a vegan family is really not a big deal to me and to my family, because we were vegan before we had children, and it's always been a very important value for my husband and I, and now for our family. So that part is actually very easy. We eat what we always ate. And we do what we always do, with the addition of sometimes taking my children to protests. But it's not. But here's what's hard about it. It's for my children, especially for my older child. He's 3. He eats what we eat. He knows that we eat a wide variety of things. He enjoys the food that we have, and he also now is starting to know that other people eat animals, and for him that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would somebody do that? And at age 3, anyone who's had children know that 3-year-olds ask why about everything, why? And it's very hard for me as a mother to answer that question. Why do people eat other animals? And as he gets older, it's going to be, why do people participate in all of this suffering when it's so evidently unnecessary? He knows it's unnecessary because he has a joyful, fulfilling life without causing harm to animals. And so for me, it's very heartbreaking as a mother to know that my child is going to have to learn that a lot of people around him, and that most people we encounter on a daily basis, are participating in the system. And the truth is, I don't know how to explain that to him, because I don't have any good answers. The best I can say is that good people do bad things. But I think it's going to be really hard for him as he grows up, and as my younger son starts to grow up as well, to make sense of that. It's very hard for me in my 30s to make sense of that, and it's been very hard for me to come to terms with that, to come to terms with the fact that there's this horrible atrocity happening to animals, and that most people I know are participating in it. It's very unsettling and sad, and I can't imagine having to deal with that as a child who doesn't have the emotional coping tools that we have started to gain as adults. So that to me is what sets apart vegan parenting from regular non-vegan parenting. So violence against animals is totally normalized in our society, but it's an emergency. I mean, what's happening to animals is an emergency situation. I don't know how else to say it. It really is urgent, and we need to treat their plight with urgency. And so for anybody who is kind of has become normalized to the idea that what's happening to animals, well, it can't be that bad, can it? Because otherwise it wouldn't be happening. It is. It is that bad. So please do what you can do to make those steps toward veganism, and not just veganism, but becoming an advocate for animals. So becoming an activist, becoming somebody who takes a stand for animals. I think of it as just doing to others what we would want them to do if we were in their situation. And if we were in the situation that the animals are in, we would want people taking our plight seriously and treating it with urgency and making changes that they need to change and being our voice and speaking up. They need us to do that. And anyone who's concerned about what's happening to animals, we need to sometimes animal rights, we can be sensitive, we can be shy, and we need to put that aside, and we need to speak up, and we need to start to change what's happening, because it's just, the scope of the suffering is staggering, and it can't stay like this.